I just want to start off with, because you're a precious metals guy, you're also a crypto guy, you do a lot of other reporting, but I wanted to get your take on gold manipulation, because we've just seen that JP Morgan, there was a trader that admitted that he spoofed the gold market, he turned state's evidence, and, before all of this, everyone thought it was a conspiracy, this really doesn't happen, and I know this is just the tip of the iceberg, but how deep do you think this goes? Do you think this is it, just this one trader or two traders, or do you think this is much larger?
Of course, it's much larger, and the reality of the Department of Justice closing this thing that the CFTC could never get their hands around proving is precious metal manipulation, both on gold and on silver. It is a big deal because not only did he admit to doing it, but he admitted that both he was trained to do it. He colluded with other traders to do it, and his bosses told him to do it, and his bosses were knowledgeable about all this stuff, which hugely implicates Blythe Masters and Jamie Dimon.
I mean, do you think the central bank is also behind all of this?
There's definitely exchange stabilization fund money controlling the cryptos. See, there's different levels of manipulation the metals, different levels of manipulation for the metals, because they had to control the metals since they went off the gold standard in 71. That's when Alan Greenspan implemented his computer programs with Arthur Burns, the head of the Fed. So this has been going on for a long, long time. Now, when you get into, what were the bankers doing that was against what the government and the Fed was doing? The Fed and the U.S. Treasury had to use the bankers, the prime lenders, to participate in these trades, because they can't be fighting against them, because it wouldn't take much money to take every single physical ounce of silver off the market. And then all you have is a derivative market trading in the hundreds of times the amount of underlying physical. So they had to get the banks in. But when the banks came in and did official manipulation, they also took over the entire manipulation and traded for their own profit, for their own purposes. And, that's why JP Morgan hasn't lost money in metals trading. I think it's for 7 or 8 years.
And that's pretty impossible, isn't it?
On any given day. Yeah. On any given day, they're guaranteed to make money. When you rig a market, you're guaranteed to make money on any given day.
Okay, so the central bank, we've already seen JP Morgan, and in the past we've seen that silver is also manipulated, and you're really into silver, and that has been manipulated too. So we have both gold and silver being manipulated for a specific purpose.
I wouldn't stop there, though.
Oh, okay.
I mean, to run an unbacked fiat monetary system without any backing at all, since 71 we haven't had any backing, and before that it was just partial backing. But to do that, you have to control the price of just about everything. So they're involved in manipulating the oil and gas markets, and it's obvious in the oil markets. You can surprises from the Department of Energy on oil reserves builds and things like that. It's all done in coordination. It's a huge operation. And there's banksters who are trying to profit off it, but also the main manipulation of all this stuff, the main power is with the Exchange Stabilization Fund. And they collude with everybody and their mother, but anybody tries to go against them, they're going to destroy them. So, and it's really easy to do with computers and derivatives that were implemented in the 70s. All you do is click a mouse and you can drive the price of anything, up 1,000 times or down to 0 and then shut the market down. So there is total control on everything from oil and gas. And a guy was asking me about milk the other day. He's a dairy farmer in the UK. And I said, well, let me check and see how the price of milk is determined. And lo and behold, it was determined off the cheese price on the COMEX. So they've been rigging the price of milk with computers and derivatives. There is nothing that they can let trade freely, because it would be obvious that the unbacked fiat monetary system is being destroyed by printing way too many dollars. So they have to keep all prices under control, and that goes for gold, silver, U.S. dollars, the foreign exchange markets. The Exchange Stabilization Fund can click a mouse and destroy any currency they want or prop up any currency they want. So there is no limitation to the amount of derivatives that can be used to manipulate markets right now.
So who controls the Exchange Stabilization Fund?
That would be the Working Group on Financial Markets. And that was created in the late 80s. And the Exchange Stabilization Fund came around in the 1934 Gold Act. And that's when they confiscated gold. But they also gave the Federal Reserve and the Treasury the ability, the legal right to control and support or rig any market they want. Any market they want. So right now, the Working Group on Financial Markets includes the head of the Fed, the head of the U.S. Treasury, which is Steve Mnuchin was the head of IT at Goldman Sachs, meaning he was the head of computer trading at Goldman Sachs. And then the other two are the head of the CFTC and the head of the SEC. And working together, they aren't in there every day, but when prices get out of control, they'll get in there. In the meantime, the banks do their own controlling and rigging based on where their book is. When Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan inherited the silver short position from Bear Stearns, that's when JP Morgan took over the silver manipulation and still has control of it today.
Is the Fed involved in this at all?
Yes.
Okay, so they're involved in the Exchange Stabilization Fund.
The Fed New York. Well, the head of the Fed is on the Working Group on Financial Markets. So they're one of the four deciders. And then ultimately the president does have the power to shut it down. And Congress has obviously the power to shut down the Federal Reserve. So, and we have a different sheriff in town with Trump. So we will see what happens. There's a lot of talk from Trump about shutting down the Fed or at least auditing it. And that would be really interesting because when you do that, you can no longer rig the markets. And then it's pure chaos because the derivative nightmare will hit.
I mean, do you think that's why he's continually contradicting the Fed? I mean, he's out there saying, oh, I thought Powell was going to be an easy money Fed. I didn't realize he was going to raise interest rates. If the economy, implodes, it's the Fed's fault. I mean, when was the last time we heard a president contradict the Fed the way he's doing it? I mean, this is going back to Kennedy maybe? Or Reagan, actually.
Yeah. I mean, there's been talk of it. There's a lot of talk of it. But they know if you stop rigging the markets, then everything's going to have to find its fair market value. Nobody knows the fair market value of anything anymore. When you have at least 40 or 50 years of market rigging, there's nothing that trades right now at its fair market value. So they know how big of a deal it is. Yeah, absolutely. Trump is going to, at some point, pull the plug on the Fed, pull the plug on the market rigging, and let the pieces fall where they may, which will also include, all these arrests we've been waiting for of the criminals within Washington.
Yeah, and I think, with the economy right now, he's always out there tweeting and telling us, the unemployment's very low, GDP's fantastic, look at the stock market. And do you think he's doing this on purpose where he's showing the economy really, really improving, so this way he's not blamed for when the entire system completely falls apart?
Well, it's really interesting because not only do they rig the markets for prices, but they also rig the data coming out of the government. We all know that inflation is not whatever they're saying right now. What are they saying, 2% or 1%?
Yeah.
We know that's a lie, and it's a blatant lie. And anytime they want to change those numbers, they just call up the BIS or not the BIS. What's it called? The
BLS.
Yeah, the people who report the data, the economic data for the United States government. And go ahead.
No, is you talking about the Bureau of Labor Statistics?
Yes, the BLS.
Yeah. Okay.
And the people who report on inflation and things, they all lie, but they're working upon the past lies. So Trump inherited the lies of Obama, who inherited the lies of Bush, who inherited the lies of Clinton. And they all have to, pretend that everything's fine. They get their market riggers in there as Treasury Secretary working with the Fed New York and get the banks colluding. And that's the way the game's been played. And it really is a click of a mouse to do that. So it's really easy to buy, billions of ounces of gold or sell billions of ounces of gold if you're the guy in charge of the mouse click. All you have to do is program him. I want to buy 1 billion ounces of gold derivatives. through the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which does not report its derivative position to anybody. And voila, you can make the price of gold go to $1,000 or $1,000,000 an ounce or $0 an ounce and shut down the market. You can do anything you want if you control that mouse.
So I want to take this a step further because a couple of years ago, they had a vote in the UK where they wanted to separate themselves from the EU, which is now called the Brexit. And the vote went through. And now we see Theresa May and Parliament, they're getting together and allegedly there'll be a Brexit. I mean, how is this going to affect everything? And do you think the central bank system will allow the UK to actually leave?
Well, there's a few things going on there. I think, no, the Brexit was set up as part of the tools to destroy the system. If England left the UK, it would introduce the kind of market chaos that even a stable market couldn't handle. But the European market is not stable at all. I mean, it's being bailed out, negative interest rates, you name it. They are struggling big time. So even a strong wind could knock down, the Greek banks or Spain or Portugal or even Germany. The whole EU project is going away. And if you introduce anything, any kind of turmoil into it, much less Brexit, which is gigantic turmoil, it will take down the European Union and the European financial system because of for example, Deutsche Bank, the largest bank derivative holder in the world. We hear stories every day how they're losing money left and right. They have guaranteed all these derivatives as kind of like an insurance policy, because when you write a derivative on sovereign debt, you get paid up front. So Deutsche Bank has all these upfront payments, but they're not looking at the liabilities, and they have over 40 trillion euro in derivatives. I mean, that is the trigger for Buffett's weapon of mass financial destruction. And you throw Brexit into that, which just today, another milestone was destroyed with this meeting of Theresa May called an emergency cabinet meeting. It's all falling apart there too. So yes, absolutely, the Brexit will destroy if the EU even lasts that long. So, and then if the EU goes away, we're going to see the big banks go down, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, which is connected obviously with JP Morgan, Citibank, and then it's contagion. And that's the thing in 2008 that needed all the bailouts. But I think this time in the US, at least, they're going to come to Congress with a bill for probably $20 trillion to bail out the banks this time. I don't think it's going to happen.
So you're saying that this is all part of what the good guys plan to have the Brexit, and you have Trump in office. He also has Andrew Jackson hanging on his wall, who campaigned on getting rid of the central bank. You think this is all a coordinated plan to bring down the central banking establishment? Yeah.
Well, definitely. That's what the Fed Boston comic books are saying is destroy the old system to put in a new system. But the reality is, yes, Trump was put there by what I call the good guys, and the Brexit vote that happened was controlled by the good guys. These bad forces that have been in control of our monetary lives, all parts of our lives for so long, are not long for this world, shall we say. But the question is, how do we get from here to there? Here being totally controlled by these guys, and there being in the future someday free markets and sound government and truth and honesty. That leap is going to be the chaos we're going to have to experience over the next probably 2 or 3 years.
So do you think the good guys, do you think they've planned on a new system and they're, preparing the new system?
They've had many new systems planned. The Fed comic books from the Road to Ruta stuff and the Fed documentation all pointed towards a gold standard. With the invention of Bitcoin and the blockchain protocol, they have shifted that plan from a gold standard to a crypto standard. And I think that's a good thing, because the majority of gold in the world is not owned by the people. The majority of gold, at least the gold they tell you about, is owned by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and that crowd. So wouldn't it be good to go on to a gold standard, just keep them in charge? But there is massive amounts of gold hidden in all over the United States and around the world that I think it'll be a hybrid between a gold standard and a crypto standard, being that the cryptos are so much better as a means of exchange than gold.
When you say, a hybrid mix, the gold part of it, is that to build confidence in the system?
Well, I think, truthfully, behind the scenes, I think we've been on a gold standard the whole time. It's just, we aren't told that. I think countries that, for example, you have countries with huge, like China and Japan, they could buy all the gold in the world that they want, knowing that the manipulators are shorting the price. They could just take all the physical and be done with it. And you might ask yourself, well, why don't they do it? Because the amount of chaos it would cause around the world would be incalculable. It would be the destruction of the system, and millions of people would die when they wake up one day and there's no bank account, there's no food, there's no water. Nothing is functioning because the monetary system functions. So it's one of those things. They got us into being dependent and reliant on unbacked fiat money as our way to live in a day-to-day mode. And to take them out, it will be very difficult, but people are working on it. So yes, I do think there is a plan to remove these people and start with something else.
And what about the U.S. dollar? It's really a Fed dollar. Is that still going to be in play, or is that going to be, when they take down the central bank, I guess that might not even exist anymore. Where are we going now?
Well, it's interesting when you think about the U.S. dollar, the vast majority, and there are different forms of money. There's fiat money, and the vast majority of U.S. dollars is electronic IOUs. So yeah, if the U.S. dollar dies, the Federal Reserve note dies. What would that mean? That would mean all fiat money dies around the world, because the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency. There's not going to be a shift to the yuan or the euro or anything else. Once people lose faith in the system, it's over. It's completely over. So I think the U.S. dollar will be around for another 10 years, or the Federal Reserve note will be around for another 10 years, but I don't think the U.S. government will be using it. I think the U.S. government is going to have to, at some point, go back to our Constitution. The U.S. dollar Federal Reserve note probably will not be worth the paper it's printed on, and it probably won't even be printed on paper anymore. It's just electronic blips. So, I'm hoping for a smooth transition, but knowing that the longer that it's delayed, the more avenue these criminal controllers have to change the story, change the narrative, create false flags, and overthrow the people, the good guys, as I call them, trying to take this out. So I'm hoping that by the end of this year, we'll have a better idea of what's going on, because there's a lot of upcoming trigger points that can't be passed by, or really the bad guys will take advantage of that.
Yeah, let's talk about some of these trigger points, because we know before the elections, Trump signed this statement about the declassification of the FISA memos, and that went to the Department of Justice. Then we had the midterm elections, and now we're seeing, all these crazy things in the elections where they're saying there's election fraud, and all of a sudden ballots are just appearing out of nowhere, and we see that things are changing within the House, within the Senate. And to move forward, is this the trigger points that you're talking about, that certain things have to happen, certain people have to be in place before we can move forward with the plan?
Yes and no. Certain people have to be in place, and certain people have to be out of place. So the people in place, they've been working on getting new judges in there who aren't part of the criminal cabal, which is great. The people who have to be out of place, yes, there was massive voting fraud. There always has been, ever since, like, Diebold, the creator of the voting machine, was a criminal institution, and they've known all along that there's criminality in our voting. it's just more obvious now. And I agree with Q in that I think the Democrats were set up. And so, but it does give us a time frame because the House of Representatives, even if the vote stays where it is, the House of Representatives will be sworn in, I think it's January 3rd. So between now and January 3rd is when Trump needs to really get his ducks in line to show that the deep state colluded on so many fronts, not only rigging the votes, but the FISA, the attempted overthrow of a sitting president. I mean, these are treasonous events. So the next 45 days, 50 days, we are going to see we're really, really, really outrageous, crazy things that you wouldn't think would happen, but they have to happen in this time frame to get these criminals out of our lives.
And you believe that this has to happen before everything else happens, like the D-class, getting rid of the central bank, having the indictments unsealed? Because you mentioned Q. Q has given us placeholders for things like the unsealed indictments, about talking about the OIG reports and things like that. So it looks like Q is preparing for the D-class, preparing for the unsealed indictments. Actually, Q has told us this, and you think we're almost there. Just these couple more things have to be put into place.
Absolutely. And Q is right. And I mean, Q obviously is in touch with, or maybe even a decider of when these things happen. The Q movement, the Q phenomenon, absolutely. That's the good guys behind the scenes that I've been talking about for over 10 years. Since I discovered, the road to comic books from the Fed, there were good guys behind the scenes. And Q is, I think, the first direct spokesperson for the good guys, which is really cool. But yeah, Q's laying down, and a lot of what he's saying is just what I said. It's got to happen before the Democrats get in the House and get sworn in on, I think it's the 3rd of January. So yeah. I mean, it's going to be crazy between now and then, economically, politically. Probably they're going to unleash more of these weather war stuff, which is crazy. And we are in for the mixer over these next couple months.
I mean, right now you mentioned weather wars, but I mean, we have the caravan coming up to the borders. Mm-hmm. We have the fires in California. We had a shooting event in California. And
you have the burning of a super fun nuclear site in California.
Yeah, that too. And I mean, is radiation being spilled out into the atmosphere with that?
Well, I did a YouTube video on this the other day. Definitely massive radiation was brought up. See, it goes back to the 1950s where there was a release at this site in California, Southern California. It was bigger than 3 Mile Island. And it was never cleaned up to the full extent. The buildings were fixed and all that, but all this radiation got into the ground, into the brush, the shrubbery, the trees. I mean, it was all over the place, but it had been basically sitting dormant. And then all of a sudden you light a match and everything's airborne. And luckily the wind was blowing 50, 60 miles an hour from the out to sea. And this place, I think it's about 100 miles from the ocean. So anybody between, the site which is right near Thousand Oaks, right where that shooting was, believe it or not, and the ocean probably got exposed to a lot of radiation. And then you got this radiation cloud out there floating around, depending on where the wind goes. Hopefully it all dissipates and goes into the oceans and then dissipates everywhere. But yeah, it's bad. And the government lies to us. And now they've been called out on that lie. So they're starting to say, well, yeah, it was a super fun site. We couldn't clean up all the radiation that was spilled, 60 years ago. And it has been released now because of the fires. It goes airborne. So, I don't know. But things like that, the ramifications aren't found out until, 2 or 3 years down the line when people started getting cancer. And you look at the area where this nuclear facility is, and everybody around it has really high cancer rates. It's kind of like that PG&E site, Aaron Brockovich movie.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, is like the government can say, yeah, there's no radiation in the air, but you're not going to know it until you start, sneezing up blood 2 or 3 years later.
Now, as we get closer and closer to the declassification and we get closer to everything coming out, Q put up something very interesting and gave us definitions of martial law and other definitions. Do you think Q is worried about what the deep state might do when all this starts to come out?
Well, you tell the deep state martial law will have to be implemented, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Because of the nature of the financial system, that we are totally and completely dependent upon it, there are certain things that need to be controlled by the government for a while. For example, if Deutsche Bank were to go down, your local grocery store would not be able to process payments, would not be able to get any food stock. All that stuff would happen. That would require martial law to be implemented to say, okay, we're taking these guys out. And by the way, we're going to maintain the basic services. We're going to make sure there's law and order, because a lot of the deep state are going to want to get Antifa and all that on a much larger scale. My advice has always been, just tell the people the truth. We're old enough and wise enough now that we can handle the truth and make sure you got your facts straight and make sure you address everything in the problems that we had, so that there is no doubt on the left or the right that we've been controlled by criminals. If they do that, I think we can get through this a lot easier than if they do what Trump is doing right now, which is like one-off, picking it off, bad players here and there, trying to get things in order, but not telling the people why, and not telling the people, just how controlled they were in the past. Because I live in California, and I'll guarantee you, if California, the people of California were told what Hillary Clinton had done and what the John Podesta and Tony Podesta were doing to children, they wouldn't be as angry at Trump as they are right now. And I think truth and honesty is the only way to go forward. And no matter how hard it is, we need to inject that into our lives.
But don't you think the mainstream media would do like an all-out blast to try to cover this up, or create events to clog up the news cycles if they just came out with the truth without everything, being in place? So if nothing's in place and they just come out with the truth, and they still have, these federal judges, they still have, these people in position, still people in the FBI, intelligence, who are corrupt, aren't you worried that they would try to cover all this up? The mainstream media would clog up the news cycles and the truth would never get out there?
No, not at all. They're part of it. So they will go to jail along with if the truth comes out, it will be discovered that the mainstream media was colluding to overthrow a sitting president. People within these corporations will be tried for treason. So they are not going to cover this up. And that's when it gets to truth and honesty. Bring out the truth and honesty, show people the evidence and the facts, and you'll see, text messages between the head of CNN and the guy investigating Hillary talking about, overthrowing a sitting president. All those people will go to jail. CNN will be shut down, most likely as a corporation. They won't be allowed to promote the lies anymore. And that's why it is so important to present everything and the true evidence and of what was really going on over the past 100 years in the United States. And don't stop at anything. Let the people know we're old enough, we're wise enough, and clearly our government officials are not smart enough to understand that it's 50 times worse to keep this stuff under wraps. Because look what has happened. Look what thou hath wrought, as I like to talk about when it comes to Greenspan. It's great that you want to go back to a gold standard in the 70s, and it's great that you're a great computer programmer and you can control the system to, make things go a little longer. But look where we are now. We're 50 times worse off in this transition than we were back in 1971. And that's all because of the computer programs that Greenspan implemented, and then the bankers took over. So yeah, I think truth and honesty can't be withheld anymore. We have to expose the truth for what it is, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I mean, I agree with you that the truth has to be brought out into the open. I just want to make sure that all the pieces are in place because, I mean, look what happened when Trump came out saying that he was spied on. The mainstream media laughed at him. They said, "Oh, he's making this up." They still,
we need to impeach him because he's not saying, because he's saying he's being stopped. And then it was found out that he's spied on, and nobody talks about that anymore.
No, and this is what happens. They bury it, and the people that are sleeping, I mean, we're awake. I mean, there's a lot of people that are awake, but there's a lot of people that are completely still asleep, still brainwashed. And I think Q put up a couple posts back that, when everything comes out, people will reject, people will be angry. And, that's the process of waking up and learning the facts. And I think that if we don't have the pieces in place, we don't have the individuals in the right positions to push the truth, I think the truth then will die because the deep state, they will do everything in their power to try to suppress it.
But we need to take their tools away. So we need to take the mainstream media mouthpiece of the deep state. We need to take that away, shut down the people who colluded to overthrow the president. And they do have evidence of people within some of the far left media that colluded to overthrow a sitting president, which is punishable. It's treason. It's sedition. Yes. It is maximum punishment is death. So will we see these people, some of them you probably know as newscasters on CNN, be put to death for their crimes?
Well, we'll have to see if that actually happens. I think eventually these people will be brought up on charges. Clinton will be brought up on charges. Comey will be brought up on charges because I do believe they have all the evidence just sitting there and waiting for it all to be produced out into the open. And I think this is what the indictments, which they're getting ready to release, I think it has all that in there.
Yeah, with the indictments, it's not the quantity of the indictments. I think a lot of those, there's 60,000 sealed indictments. I think there's maybe a handful that cover a lot of people. And, so I'm not all excited about 60,000, 70,000, 80,000 indictments. But I am excited that we are working our way towards a point where you can either continue to hide things from the American people and we will lose our country. And then the good guys won't be able to achieve anything and will be kind of kick the can down the road again. Or we can actually make that choice, pull the plug on these guys. The NSA has every single form of communication that's ever gone over the electronics. So any text message you've sent, they're listening to our phone call right now. Anything and everything from everybody, including presidents, including, other presidents around the world, dictators, leaders, they have it all. They've had that technology since the 60s and it's only gotten easier and better to use. So if there are good people in charge of the NSA, which I think there are now, they can pull that out as evidence and say, oh, here's a text message you sent to that Mueller sent to Comey talking about the way we can shut down Trump, and Brennan talking to Comey about assassinating Trump and things like that. We're going to see all that because we have all that, and there's nothing that can be hidden anymore, and that's where our freedom lies. Our freedom doesn't lie in putting these people in jail, but continuing the old system of not telling the people the truth. Our freedom lies in the truth. And we are old enough, we are wise enough, we are smart enough that if you tell us the truth and you show us why we should believe it's the truth, some real evidence, and you shut down CNN and CNBC and whoever else was colluding to spread false information, that's where our freedom lies. And until we get there, I fear that this movement will be overthrown. So I agree that you need to get certain people in place, but the longer it takes, and we all know this from going back 100 years with these guys, The longer it takes, the more chances they have to figure out a new way around not losing power. So I think we absolutely need to start firing off all the facts and information, and arrests need to start happening now.
And what happens to the other countries? You mentioned the Five Eyes and things like that, because, we know that Australia, the UK, they're all behind this where they're spying. Now, when the truth comes out and these countries start to hear that, wait, you were behind and working with the deep state in the United States, do you think this is going to be a worldwide movement?
Well, we've all known for a long time, at least, the awake people, that the Queen of England has been heavily involved in controlling the United States through their banking arms, and the Queen of England is controlled by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And then you get back into you go through history and there's something wrong. That, the massive amount of taxes we pay, where do they go? So that has always been there. It just needs to be out in the open. Yeah. England and other countries colluded with the deep state to overthrow a sitting president. They are our ally, our close friend. Can we allow them to get away with this? What are they going to pay us? What will the Queen of England pay us in, probably not money, but in something else, maybe gold, as reparations for trying to overthrow our president? That type of stuff I can see happening. Trump's a deal maker, and he knows that England was involved in the overthrow of him. He's going to say, hey, what are you going to do to make up for this? Oh, by the way, you hold the world's gold in your vaults in London. Give it to us now and we won't bomb you, type of thing. He won't say it that way, but he'll say, yeah, I think everybody should be held accountable for what they've done. And then that's the only way to move forward. We can't just brush it under the rug like England had nothing to do with it and pretend things are going to be fine in the future. We need to expose everything.
I agree.